On to Roman numeral 2. Roman numeral 2 is talking about how Congress works when it works. We start with the design of Congress. Congress, remember, is designed to be bicameral. Bicameral means two houses. There are two halves. There's the Senate and the House of Representatives. Senate is based on equality. House of Representatives is based on population. In the Senate, every state gets 2 votes. In the House of Representatives, states get at least 1 vote, but the other votes are based upon the population. There are a couple of reasons why we designed it this way. 3, in fact. The first reason is practical. Remember, we talked about this, that the only reason why the Constitution was approved was because of the Connecticut Compromise. The Connecticut Compromise was what made it bicameral. There was half based off the New Jersey plan and half based off the Virginia plan. So without a bicameral legislature, the Constitution might not have been approved. The second reason why we did it is basically because we stole it from the British, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The British had already used this design, and so we basically copied it. This is part of the reason why, in the original version, the Senate was picked by the states, just as the House of Lords was not elected by the people. So same idea. Half that was supposed to be picked by the public, half that was not. And the third reason is more theoretical. The idea is that by having a bicameral legislature, it allows for a cooling off process, if you will. Rather than rushing through bad legislation or bad ideas, the House and the Senate serve as sort of a check and a balance on each other. The two of them, even each other out. So anything the House wants to do, the Senate has to be approved of, and vice versa. So that's why it's actually different. In theory, the House of Representatives and the Senate are equal, but in reality, not so much. There is an upper house and a lower house. And the argument has always been that the Senate is the upper house and the House of Representatives is the lower house. This gets into the qualifications and the reason why some of them are, why it's considered to be upper house, lower house. Again, it gets into the qualifications. So, to be a member of the House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 years old and you have to live in the state you want to represent. To be in the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old and live in the state you want to represent. In the House, you have to have been a citizen for 7 years. In the Senate, you have to have been a citizen for 9 years. And that's pretty much it in terms of the qualifications, besides actually being elected. So in terms of base qualifications, you can already see there's a difference. Senators were supposed to be older, wiser, and so forth. But if you go beyond the basic qualifications, you begin to see what I mean. For example, in the House of Representatives, you represent only a fraction of a state, a district. In the Senate, you represent an entire state. So senators are given more responsibility. They have to, represent more people. So that would be one thing. Another reason why there's an upper house, lower house is that in the Senate, you are elected for a 6-year term. In the House of Representatives, you're elected for a 2-year term. In addition, in the Senate, only 1/3 of the Senate is up for election in any given year. Whereas in the House of Representatives, all representatives are up for election every 2 years. And so what that means is that the House is basically reshuffling every 2 years. New members are coming in and leaving and so forth. Whereas the Senate is a continuous body. It's always in session because 2/3 of the group is safe. Only 1/3 is up for election any given year. That's why, for example, at the moment in North Carolina, Senator Burr is up for election. In 2018, nobody will be, and then in 2020, Senator Tillis will be up again. And then round and round it goes. So it's a cycle that way. So we talked about who they represent, talked about the length of their terms. Look at the average age. In the Senate, the average age is, I believe, early 60s. In the House, it's in the late 40s. So the senators are going to be older. Likewise, senators are also have much more longevity. The average length of a Senate career is much longer than that of a representative's career. You also have the fact of their responsibilities. The Senate is the one that's responsible for declaring war, approving Supreme Court justices, approving presidential appointments. The House doesn't get that. So again, this is why the Senate is considered to be the upper house and the House of Representatives is considered to be the lower house. Even though in theory they're equal, in practical terms, the upper house really is the Senate. Now, in the original design for Congress, senators were not elected by the people. Instead, senators were chosen by the states. So the state government would get together and they would send 2 senators off. The problem with it, again, originally this was to be sort of a practical design, so that the states had a voice in Washington, D.C., away from what the public might want. Because remember, the public was largely uneducated and didn't know what they were doing. So that's why the Senate was supposed to be the wiser body, because they would pick people who knew what they were doing and could protect us from the rabble of the House of Representatives. The flaw in this plan was that the states, especially by the time you get to the mid-late 1800s, the states were just giving those senator jobs away to whomever paid them the most money, basically bribes. So the nickname for the Senate became the Millionaires Club. The Senate became known as the Millionaires Club because it was filled with just the people who paid the most money to get the job. So it wasn't the best qualified, it wasn't the smartest, it wasn't the best equipped. It was just simply the guys who paid the most money. So the term Millionaires Club became sort of a derogatory nickname. It became an insult. The idea being that rather than being the oldest and wisest and most important, instead it was just the guys who paid the most. This is changed with the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment is created in the early 1900s, and it's what gives the popular vote to the Senate for senators. So thanks to the 17th Amendment, the public picks the senators rather than the states, and we no longer have to worry so much about the Millionaires Club. And then under checks and balances, what you're talking about here is basically what Congress's job is in terms of like what they actually do and so forth. Starting with oversight. Congressional oversight is a blanket term that basically means Congress has the ability to investigate pretty much anything they want. In theory, congressional oversight is supposed to be reserved for government. It's their ability to investigate other parts of government to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. For example, they can investigate the IRS, the DMV, they can investigate the executive branch, whatever they feel like doing. They have oversight, and then through those investigations, they can pass laws, they can make appointments, they can make recess appointments, they can make declarations, etc., etc., etc. But oversight gives them abilities to pretty much investigate whatever they want. For example, there have been congressional committees about like steroids in baseball. There have been congressional committees about obscenities in music. Whatever they want, Congress can investigate, and that's what oversight is. It gives them the ability to investigate. In terms of checks and balances, though, again, it gives them the ability to actually make sure government is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which, again, is a pretty valuable tool. The next one, the power of appointment. The power of appointment, remember that... I think I lost you there. Okay, power of appointment. The power, I don't know why it does that. I think it did that in our last video too. Okay, the power of appointment basically means that, remember, Congress, or at least the Senate, has to approve appointments made by the President. Appointments to the Cabinet, appointments to the Supreme Court. This is to prevent the President from simply putting his cronies on the Supreme Court, or, going the Caligula route and putting his horse on the Cabinet or something like that. So by their appointments or refusal to appoint, it serves as a check on the president. Take, for example, the current situation with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is basically split at the moment between 4 conservatives, I should say, and 4 liberal judges. Since President Obama is a Democrat, his choice would likely be a liberal judge, which would then throw the balance to 5 liberal, 4 conservative. As a result, the senators, who are mostly conservative Republicans, are refusing to vote on his nominee so that he can't put another judge on the court. Now, whether that's smart or not is up for debate, but that's how they're choosing to exercise their power. They're using checks and balances by refusing the power of appointment that's designed to keep President Obama's ability to control the Supreme Court down. The last thing, under scope, the logic here is that Congress has a slightly different scope than what the President has. Because they've got the whole balance between national lawmaking and constituency, Congress is going to be focused on different areas than the President is. The President doesn't have to worry about his constituency because his constituency is all Americans. So the President is basically, his representation in national lawmaking overlap because he represents all of the people, which is also national lawmaking. Congress, on the other hand, because they have to do that balance between national lawmaking and representation, they bring to the table a unique perspective. So, for example, the president, again, doesn't really, care that much about, say, shipping on the Mississippi River, except for what it does in a national sense. He's not necessarily going to pay attention to the jobs that it brings to New Orleans. The senator from Louisiana, the representative from New Orleans, they bring a different perspective. And so their perspectives, because of their scope, help to influence what the president wants to do and what he can do and what he thinks he should do. Okay, that takes you through both Roman numerals 1 and 2. By my count, you're at about 35 minutes, I think. If you finish all of this, great. You have a little bit of extra time to go back and rewatch things or to ask each other questions or to fill in the blanks. Otherwise, I don't think there's really enough time to go on into Roman numeral 3 because that's a doozy. So we will talk about that instead on Monday when I will return. But in any case, I hope everyone has a good weekend. And yeah, I think that about takes care of it. So, good night.